Thanks, Senator Marcus. Senator Mullin, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, sir. I sure wish we would have had an opportunity to speak beforehand. You made a statement that you look forward to working with all of us, but I haven't heard from you. You haven't reached out to me. I'd love to sit down and have these conversations, these questions I have for you in a longer setting. Unfortunately, I only have 5 minutes. So when I ask you a question, I'm really looking as close to a yes or no, and I don't mean to be rude, but I will cut you off if you start going on, because they should be some questions that you should be able to answer pretty quick. Do you believe a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to clean air, or that you should work closely with the states in developing your thoughts?
No and yes.
What do you mean no and yes?
No, I do not believe that one size fits all. And yes, I think states are our partners.
So how much do you take in consideration when you're looking at regulating the East Coast versus the West Coast, especially when you start looking at emissions for vehicles, and taking into consideration that my wife drives an average about 5,000 miles literally a month to take my kids back and forth to school because we live out in the middle of nowhere on a ranch, and it's an hour for her to get there and get back, versus an electric car, where an electric car is not feasible. We'd spend half our time on a charger.
Well, one of the approaches we've been taking for a long time and continue to take is to set standards in a way to give.
But wouldn't you think that the state should be open to that? That the state should be ones to make the standards for them, rather than having the East Coast and the West Coast make those decisions? Because you've mentioned California multiple times, and PG&E, which is, you know, the Pacific Gas and Electric Company of California, and you start talking about their standards. You've actually bragged on California. And do you think California sets the gold standard for setting emission rules, electrical rules, as far as energy cost, and setting the standard for clean energy and clean air?
Well, from a technology perspective, California has been a leader, but we
okay. Well, let's just stop on that. So they're a leader, right? But yet they had the most unaffordable gasoline and energy costs, and they have rolling blackouts. I had the privilege of staying most of 2020 in California because of an accident my son had, and he was going through rehabilitation there. And it was interesting to me at around 8 to 10 o'clock every night, during the hottest times of the year, they had rolling blackouts. And they set them on zones. And it was interesting because we talk about the disprivileged neighborhoods, but yet it was the disprivileged neighborhoods that always seemed to have the rolling blackouts. It set out the zones, right, where they're at, and the zones were rated depending on their importance. And they would have rolling blackouts, and they would set the time when those were going to hit. Is that affordable and reliable energy? Don't you think that should play a cost into considering things?
It should absolutely.
But yet California, you think, is setting a standard for us, and you want to put their rules on Oklahoma?
I don't think we have the authority to do that, even if we wanted to.
But if you're using California as a model and you're setting this rule, then you're forcing that on us. And yet that's a good plan. PG&E can even get a permit to upgrade their systems because of the environmental impacts that supposedly it has. And so they have the most unreliable and some of the oldest transmission lines out there. And yet you're using them as someone that says they support your policies moving forward, and you think that's a bragging point?
I probably should have been more specific, Senator.
It's not specific. We could have had this conversation if you would have just reached out to me and let's have this conversation. But it concerns me when you're going to be heading this agency, specifically in this area, and you're talking about California as a gold standard. I don't want California rules. I don't want them to play a role in Oklahoma. I want affordable and reliable energy. I don't want to have rolling blackouts, to which we don't have rolling blackouts in Oklahoma. I don't want them to make a decision on what neighborhood is going to be shut down and which isn't, which is the irony of that when they're having rolling blackouts. Kramer, it was funny because it was never the retail area. It was never hospitals. It was never the fire department or the police stations. It was poor neighborhoods that was getting the roll. And it was the same time over and over again. And the irony of that, too, get this. You could set your clock to it. Because when they had the blackout, because they would announce when the time was going to be, right? Wait 30 minutes and you start hearing sirens because the criminals also knew where the blackouts were going to be, and they started breaking into houses about the same time. And that's the energy policy you want for the rest of America?
Senator, I think we have a lot to talk about. I'm going to make myself available.
We have a
at your
lot to talk about,
convenience,
right?
to have that
What I don't want you
conversation.
to do is force something on us. If people in California want to live that way, let them vote those people in and let them make their decisions. But you're representing the United States, the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States. And your say should take in consideration of the state's say, and the state should have a bigger stake in it than you. And you shouldn't set a standard that's going to be across the board. And when you start talking about emission rules, that affects all of us. We haven't even talked about trucking, which I carried a CDL in my back pocket. I'd love to have a longer conversation with you on that, too. I yield back.
All right. I hope you, the two of you have an opportunity to continue this conversation. I think that's very, very much needed.